She wanted my cabin, my weekend, and acted like she was entitled to both. I'd never met her before, didn't even know her name, yet she insisted the hoe had approved her stay. When I laughed at the idea, she warned I'd regret that reaction. I've dealt with unusual neighbors before, but this was on another level. She showed up with paperwork, backup, and a kind of rehearsed certainty that made it feel like she'd been planning this encounter for ages. By the time it ended, flashing blue lights filled my driveway while she screamed my name into the night. This wasn't some simple misunderstanding. I understand that much now. Tell me in the comments if you've ever dealt with someone this brazen. The lake was supposed to offer peace, for a short 48 hours. I believed that promise. That's exactly how long it took for our dream retirement cabin by the water to start looking more like a property management nightmare. I'm grand. I've owned a garage for more years than I'd like to admit, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Does your neighborhood have people like the ones we've run into here? We were barely unpacked, boxes still scattered across the porch, when it began. I was setting up my workshop in the back while Emily sorted our belongings, careful as always with every detail. The moving truck hadn't even cleared the driveway when I heard deliberate footsteps coming up toward us. That alone should have been my warning, but I was focused on tools and grease-stained hands, not on strangers. When I looked up, she was already there, Pam Westona, walking onto our property like she ran the whole community. Her presence was heavy, unsettling, as if she carried authority in her shadow. Clipboard clutched like a badge, phone raised and live streaming me to whoever was watching. She didn't ask, she announced, "Everyone in this lakeside community is required to join the HOA." Her tone reminded me of customers at my shop who think they know engines better than the mechanic who's been repairing them for decades. I set down the rag and approached, already sensing the pushy sales pitch I hadn't asked for. Emily, never one to be rattled, looked up and answered firmly but politely, "We'll need to see the legal paperwork first." Her expression told me she was already analyzing things as she always does when something feels off. Years of handling compliance and housing paperwork had made her sharp with details. Pam's smile was all surface, no warmth, as she handed over a thick bundle of documents, drawing attention to pages about participation fees and lake rules. As she rattled off community standards, my attention drifted toward the trail that led to the water. That's when I spotted a weathered, half-hidden sign among weeds, "Lake maintained by state parks." Her next comment snapped me back, "You've had code violations piling up since May, haven't you?" That stopped me cold. How could she possibly know that? And if this really was HOA territory, why would the state still be maintaining the lake? Something didn't add up. I decided to bring it up later with Emily, who's always better at dissecting the fine print. Pam carried on about proper behavior for residents, but my mind kept circling that state park sign. If the government maintained the lake, then public access should be guaranteed and no membership needed. She finally turned her attention to my garage setup, frowning and tossing out remarks about community standards. My first instinct was to snap back about how my garage has been meeting real standards of my customers for decades without any HOA interference. Instead, I kept it civil, told her we'd review everything before deciding. Meanwhile, Emily quietly took photos of every page. Smart move. Pam noticed and made a comment about how most people find cooperation easier than resistance. At the time, it sounded patronizing. Later, I realized it was a threat wrapped as neighborly advice. When she finally left, Emily and I spread the documents across the kitchen table. The fees were outrageous, way beyond what we'd planned. The rules were suffocating. No certain vehicles in driveways, mandatory lawn schedules, restrictions on what counted as acceptable outdoor activities. One section caught my eye: lake access. It claimed home membership was required for fishing, swimming, even just walking along shoreline paths, but that clashed with what I saw on the sign. The state handled lake maintenance, which meant public access should be a given. The contradictions were piling up. I pointed out the contradictions to Emily, and she agreed that we needed to dig into who actually owned and managed the property before we signed anything. At this point, it felt like we'd stepped right into the middle of some power struggle we didn't yet understand. That night, while we were settling into our new routine and talking through our worries about the so-called HOA, something happened that made my uneasiness sharpen into real alarm. Around 9:30, our doorbell camera caught movement near the mailbox. The motion sensor clicked on just in time to record a clipboard dropping to the ground, followed by hands rifling through our private mail before the figure darted back into the darkness. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to prove someone was deliberately searching through our correspondence and not just a passerby being curious. I showed Emily the footage. She studied it with the same sharp focus she uses whenever she sees evidence of wrongdoing. The reality hit hard. We'd lived here for just a single day, and already, someone was tampering with our mail. The clipboard could have belonged to anyone, but paired with Pam's earlier visit and her smug comment about cooperation being easier than resistance, the timing felt too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe my instincts were right and this was the start of a targeted campaign against us. Either way, our lakeside retreat was quickly turning into something far from peaceful. The next morning only confirmed my fears. Pam left, but I noticed someone else standing in the neighbor's yard, clipboard in hand, just watching. And by the weekend, things escalated again. I stepped outside to find official-looking violation notices plastered across our property, taped to the mailbox, the garage, the front door, even tucked under windshield wipers. We'd been here exactly 3 days. And apparently, that was enough time to fail some invisible checklist of community standards. Coffee in hand, I walked around collecting them, baffled at how Pam had managed to identify so many supposed problems in such a short time. Looking back, I should have recognized it for what it was: the opening move of a harassment campaign. Emily joined me, still in pajamas, and we spread the stack of notices across the table. 2 complaints stood out: mechanical tools visible in a residential space and grass maintenance below standards. That second one made me laugh out loud. We hadn't even been here long enough for the grass to grow a fraction of an inch. The accusations weren't just unrealistic, they were fabricated. Emily calmly pointed out that my garage setup was perfectly normal for a homeowner. I wish I could say I kept my cool, but who wouldn't be furious at such obvious bad faith harassment? What struck me most was Pam's performance. She wasn't just leaving notices, she was live streaming herself doing it. From our kitchen window, I caught glimpses of her speaking to her phone about educating new residents. It wasn't about community rules. It was a staged performance, meant to humiliate us publicly before we'd even had a chance to meet our neighbors. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I found something that turned my irritation into real concern. While checking my truck, I spotted industrial-grade staples driven deep into the tire sidewall. Not random debris, not an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my vehicle, and the timing left little doubt who was behind it. I've been in the automotive world too long not to recognize intentional damage. This was beyond petty notices, this was criminal vandalism. Pam had escalated from paperwork games to property destruction. She didn't stop there. Instead of plastering more papers, Pam sent a mass email to every resident. The subject line read, "Lakeside newcomers need community guidance." She never accused us outright, too clever for that, but the wording made it clear she was painting Emily and me as disruptive outsiders. It wasn't just harassment now. She was systematically turning the entire neighborhood against us before we'd even introduced ourselves. And then came the lake warning sign. Bold letters announced that non-members risked immediate loss of all lake privileges pending compliance review. It was the first direct threat about excluding us from community spaces. That sign brought me back to the weathered state park marker I'd seen on our first day. If the state maintained the lake, then Pam's claims of authority were nothing but smoke and mirrors. Emily agreed it was time to dig deeper into the property records and uncover who actually held power here. We began reviewing the records closely. During one of Pam's live stream performances, something slipped through that she clearly hadn't intended to broadcast. While showing off her violation tracking routine, the camera caught a flash of bank routing numbers on her paperwork. The problem? They didn't match any local financial institutions. From my years dealing with technical numbers in automotive work, I recognize them instantly, and not official accounts at all, but numbers consistent with personal checking accounts. That alone raised red flags of potential fraud. though at that moment I wasn't entirely sure how deep it ran. The weekend grew even stranger. A tow truck started circling our block not once or twice, but several times across Saturday afternoon. Each pass, the driver slowed near our driveway, studying our vehicles, only to speed off the second I stepped outside. It wasn't random. It felt coordinated, like someone was probing our routines or looking for weaknesses. I began documenting every pass with my phone, certain we'd need evidence if this continued. Our security cameras confirmed the same truck kept returning, at different times of day and night, always repeating the same pattern: a slow surveillance, then a quick getaway when noticed. This wasn't casual harassment anymore. This was organized. Pam's campaign was more calculated than I'd realized. Emily suggested we keep meticulous records of everything, and she was right. It felt less like neighborhood disagreements and more like preparing a case file. I couldn't shake the thought, had we made a mistake moving here? The peaceful retreat we imagined was morphing into something resembling a battlefield, and we hadn't even finished unpacking. What troubled me most wasn't just Pam's aggression, but the desperation behind it. She wasn't acting like a neighbor enforcing rules as she was working overtime, almost frantic, to control us. It made me wonder, was something about us specifically a threat to her power, or was this how she treated everyone, unwilling to bow down immediately? That night, I heard scratching along the back fence. Not the sound of an animal, something bigger. A shape moved briefly in the darkness, then vanished. By morning, our water main had been shut off. When Tuesday rolled around, Emily and I went to a community meeting at the center, but stepping inside felt less like a gathering and more like walking into a courtroom. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Pam sat beside a man I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Alan Harper, calling himself a documentation specialist. The title alone made me uneasy. When I asked what kind of law he practiced, Alan sidestepped, saying he handled compliance paperwork and regulatory issues. That should have been my first red flag. Instead, I was distracted by the thick pile of contracts spread across the table like ammunition. The documents themselves were suspiciously dense, confusing legal jargon that seemed more designed to intimidate than inform. Alan projected examples onto a portable screen, and I noticed immediately the logos and letterheads came from all over: Texas, California, even one with markings from Florida. None of them matched our state or local area. These weren't customized for this community. They were generic downloads from the internet, hastily edited with our neighborhood's name slapped on top. I'm no lawyer, but even I could tell it looked sloppy, maybe even fraudulent. Emily was quietly scribbling notes beside me, raising her eyebrows at inconsistencies Alan glossed over. Was this man truly qualified, or just another part of Pam's show? Then, I spotted something even more telling: a small lapel pin on Alan's jacket, bearing the same emblem I'd seen on Pam's letterhead. I didn't call it out yet, but the connection was obvious. He wasn't an independent professional, he was part of her circle. During the review of contracts, Emily uncovered the biggest red flag yet. The handouts included QR codes supposedly linking to financial records and community bylaws. When she scanned one, it didn't lead to official HOA systems at all. It went directly to a personal PayPal account. The account name? Boston.com Community. Pam's setup. That alone made my stomach turn. Who in their right mind uses a personal PayPal account to collect HOA dues? Even I knew that was beyond inappropriate. It was practically screaming fraud. Real homeowner associations use proper business accounts, not casual PayPal setups meant for personal use. Emily caught that immediately, and when she questioned the links, Alan shuffled his papers nervously, promising the technical details would be updated later. That alone told me he knew he'd been caught. Pam shifted gears. Instead of piling up violation notices, she unveiled her new initiative, a so-called volunteer program for lakeside maintenance. The way she phrased it made volunteering sound mandatory, especially for so-called problem residents who hadn't demonstrated enough community cooperation. No translation was necessary as she meant us. The list of duties included cleaning common areas, maintaining trails, and helping with administrative tasks, all under Pam's direct supervision. It wasn't community service, it was punishment dressed up as contribution. As if that wasn't enough, Alan began dropping sly comments about Emily's employment history, implying her background was questionable and maybe out of step with community values. He never made outright accusations, just enough insinuations to plant suspicion. It was pure character assassination. I pushed back, calmly but firmly. Interesting how rumors spread before anyone asks about the facts. Alan's smile faltered. Clearly, he hadn't expected resistance. The social pressure tactics escalated quickly. Families who had seemed friendly days earlier now shifted away from us, avoiding eye contact, choosing seats across the room. It wasn't organic, it was orchestrated. Pam had been poisoning the well, turning people against us before we even had the chance to properly introduce ourselves. This divide and isolate strategy was sharper than I expected from someone whose only real qualification seemed to be waving around official-looking documents. Were these neighbors genuinely convinced we were trouble, or simply following Pam's lead without question? When pressed again about his legal background, Alan dodged, tossing out vague references to compliance consulting and regulatory advising. His business cards were sleek but suspicious, just an email and a phone number, no physical office. No law firm name. For someone claiming to be an expert in regulations, that was a glaring hole. Emily pressed further, asking about bar admission and practice areas. Alan shifted uncomfortably, changed the subject, and avoided eye contact. The financial documents he presented were even worse. Years of reviewing repair invoices had trained me to spot sloppy math, and this was riddled with it. Formats switched between corporate ledgers and individual tax forms. Fee structures varied wildly, as if copied from random templates. Costs for maintenance were grossly inflated compared to the modest amenities actually available. None of it added up. It wasn't professional. It wasn't consistent. It looked like a patchwork of experiments designed to siphon money from residents. Then came the QA. Alan's responses exposed just how out of his depth he really was. He couldn't explain even the basics of property law, HOA governance, or resident rights under state regulations. Instead, he fell back on buzzwords, half-answers, and deflection in the same way clueless customers talk about that rattling noise under the hood without any idea what they're describing. This man wasn't qualified. He was a prop. The meeting ended with Pam handing out formal invitations for something she called a resolution conference later in the week at the Lakeside Pavilion. The wording was deliberately vague, but the tone was clear. It was our last chance to comply before harsher actions were taken. Emily and I exchanged a glance on the way out. We both knew what this really was. Not community building, not cooperation. An ultimatum, a staged campaign to break us down through intimidation. As we walked back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the truth forming in my mind. This wasn't neighborhood management. It was a fraud operation hiding under the mask of authority. The mismatched templates, the personal PayPal account, the fake expertise, everything pointed to a scheme designed to exploit. What we were facing went far beyond routine HOA overreach. It raised bigger questions of how much of this official organization was actually fabricated, and worse, how many neighbors had already been manipulated by the same deceptive tactics without realizing it. Outside our cabin, Emily stopped in her tracks. "I need to make some calls," she said quietly. The weight in her voice told me this wasn't routine anymore. Later that evening, she went out for her usual jog along the lakeside trail. At first, it seemed ordinary, but by the time she returned, everything between us and Pam had shifted permanently. While Emily was running, I noticed an SUV idling too long near our cabin. Looking through the window, I saw Pam's vehicle creeping along the jogging path, keeping a calculated distance behind Emily. It wasn't coincidence, it was predatory. Each time Emily paused, Pam's SUV stopped. Each time she resumed, the vehicle rolled forward again. When Emily finally came back, her expression said it all. On the most secluded part of the trail near the old boat dock, Pam had stepped out of her car and deliberately blocked Emily's route. What began as more talk about non-compliance escalated the moment Emily insisted on reviewing the legal documents before making any commitments. That's when Pam revealed a gun grip in plain sight, resting in the console of her SUV. She angled it just enough for Emily to notice, then delivered her ultimatum. "I enforce compliance here. Respect comes one way or another. I'm done waiting for you people to learn how this community works." Pam didn't have to say the word violence. The meaning was crystal clear. She was showing that she had both the means and the will to escalate. What chilled me most was how staged it seemed. Pam had chosen the time, the place, and the moment to reveal that weapon for maximum psychological impact. But Emily didn't react the way Pam probably expected. Instead of fear, she became methodical, focused, determined. She immediately sat down at her laptop, documenting the incident with precise details, timestamps, and GPS coordinates. Then she encrypted the files and uploaded copies to multiple secure cloud accounts. When I asked about her security measures, she called them standard procedures for documenting criminal behavior and mentioned preserving evidence integrity for potential prosecution. It struck me that this wasn't her first time facing intimidation. I realized I might not know my daughter as fully as I thought. I'd heard stories like this on a drama nest before, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. The raw anger that comes from seeing your family threatened over something as trivial as a homeowners association is indescribable. You start questioning everything how such a mundane conflict spiraled into armed intimidation, and whether you somehow caused it. But Emily wasn't rattled. She was prepared. Her investigation quickly became systematic. We matched the threatening note left at our cabin to the exact printer used for the community's meeting materials. The same paper, the same ink. That meant either Pam was abusing community resources for personal harassment, or the entire organization was nothing more than her personal fiefdom. Either way, it was damning evidence. Emily suggested we check the convenience store nearby for surveillance footage covering the trail. The manager was surprisingly cooperative, and we soon had another piece of the puzzle: a broken bar. The convenience store cameras turned out to be critical. Their exterior view covered parts of the lakeside trail where Emily said the confrontation took place. If the footage captured Pam's stalking or even fragments of her threats, it could turn this from a he said, she said into hard evidence for legal action. Reflecting on Pam's escalation, it became clear this wasn't about HOAs anymore. She was using fear as a weapon, proving that resistance would be met with increasingly serious consequences. It felt less like community enforcement and more like organized crime. What kind of person threatens violence over administrative paperwork? And how many neighbors had already endured similar intimidation without daring to speak out? Pam's chilling statement about enforcing compliance revealed a lot about her mindset. She truly believed she was the rightful authority in our neighborhood, even though all signs pointed to her operation being fabricated. To her, she wasn't breaking laws. In her mind, she was imposing order on residents who didn't fall in line. That level of self-delusion made her far more dangerous than the average bully. That evening, another threat came, this time by text message. It read, Sunday 5 p.m., Lake Dock final discussion. No name, no signature, but the commanding tone matched Pam's style perfectly. The choice of location was strategic too. The lake dock was isolated, far from houses, with little visibility and almost no foot traffic. Emily read the message with the same calculating focus she had shown before, already working through a response strategy. She wasn't planning avoidance, and she wasn't planning submission. That night, I checked our doors and windows in ways I'd never considered necessary when we first bought this peaceful lakeside retreat. In just over a week, Pam's harassment had evolved from paperwork disputes to stalking to weapon displays. The walls were closing in, but Emily's calm expression told me she wasn't cornered as she was preparing. She spent the next hour on encrypted calls, speaking in codes I couldn't follow. When she hung up, her voice was steady. Sunday will be interesting, she said. By Sunday afternoon, tension hung in the air like static. By 4:30, neighbors were already gathering at the lakefront, clearly anticipating a spectacle. From our cabin window, I saw families carrying folding chairs, settling in as if for a performance. People arrived in small coordinated groups, clustering together in a way that made the whole event feel staged. Emily prepared with quiet precision. She moved with the same methodical focus I'd seen her use in professional settings, but there was something different today, almost eagerness. As we walked to the dock, I felt eyes following us from every angle. Pam stood at the center, clipboard in hand, radiating smug authority. She'd arranged her audience carefully, ensuring we were isolated from the others. Emily's composure was striking. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't intimidated. She walked with a quiet authority that seemed almost a broken bar trained. Her casual clothes carried an undertone of professionalism, her posture and gestures purposeful. She acknowledged neighbors politely when they avoided our eyes, showing not even a trace of weakness. It was like watching her step into a role she was born to play. For the first time, I wondered what exactly did my daughter really do for work? The confrontation began with Emily's voice cutting through the tension. She didn't shout, she didn't tremble, she simply asked direct, pointed questions. About financial records, legal registration, incorporation documents, and fiduciary responsibilities. Her knowledge of property law and governance structures stunned even me. This wasn't a frightened resident defending herself. This was someone systematically dismantling Pam's entire operation in front of her audience. Emily's pointed questions about accountability and legal responsibility clearly rattled Pam. The more Emily pressed, the more the crowd began to notice cracks in Pam's authority. Neighbors who once looked confident in their support started showing uncertainty. This wasn't the so-called troublemaker Pam had warned them about. This was someone who understood the law far better than their self-appointed leader. Pam's inability to provide documents or clear answers exposed her desperation. Instead of responding with facts, she raised her voice, insisting that any challenge to her leadership was an insult to community values. But when Emily demanded direct answers about finances and jurisdiction, Pam completely lost control. The Section 8 of a legitimate community manager collapsed, revealing nothing more than a bully propped up by fear. Pam shouted into her phone, trying to bark out orders, but before she could finish, a neighbor stepped in front of her with a phone camera raised. "You've gone too far," the neighbor said. That was the breaking point. Humiliated, Pam snapped. In a reckless burst of anger, she pulled a gun from her jacket and leveled it at Emily. Her voice cut across the lakeside gathering. "Join this community or be permanently excluded from everything here." The collective gasp from families was audible everywhere. Parents shielded their children. Phones came out instantly, capturing every second. In that instant, Pam's campaign of intimidation crossed into outright criminal assault. The gunshot came next. She fired into the air, the sound echoing off the water as people screamed. The neighbor's phone tumbled to the ground. My instincts took over. I rushed forward, wrestled the weapon from her grip, and secured her wrists behind her back. "By whose authority?" she spat. I flashed my badge. Her jaw dropped, words failing her. Then Emily's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "Sheriff Emily Porter, lower your weapon immediately." Her tone carried absolute authority, transforming the mood instantly. Neighbors who had once been manipulated now realized they were standing against a law enforcement officer. Pam's face shifted from arrogance to sheer panic as reality sank in. The weight of her mistake hit hard when Emily played back the recorded audio. Pam's earlier declaration, "I am the law," here re-echoed across the lake, along with other incriminating threats. Neighbors stood in stunned silence, their phones raised to capture every word. The myth of Pam's authority crumbled right in front of them. As Emily held control of the situation, I guided panicked families to safety, moving children and parents behind the pavilion and out of any potential danger zone. Some neighbors needed coaxing to leave, frozen in disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. It was clear now how deeply Pam had deceived them. With multiple phones recording from different angles, every detail of her crime was preserved. The threats, the gunfire, the intimidation, and Emily's professional handling of it all. The sound of approaching sirens soon followed, drawing closer until backup units arrived. Officers moved quickly, securing Pam's weapon and placing her in handcuffs. She looked dazed, still unable to grasp how her imagined authority had collapsed into criminal charges. Neighbors who had once obeyed her now watched silently as she was read her rights and escorted away. During the evidence sweep, Emily snapped a photo of a small state code on the Warren Lake access sign I'd noticed weeks earlier. At the time, it seemed like simple documentation, but later it would prove far more significant. The officers worked carefully, gathering witness statements and collecting physical evidence from the dock. The truth of Pam's fraud and intimidation was now undeniable. The witnesses gave consistent statements about Pam's weapon display and Emily's calm, professional handling of the situation. Together, their testimonies formed an airtight case for prosecution. In the immediate aftermath, the atmosphere felt almost unreal. Neighbors began approaching us, some apologizing, others offering awkward explanations for why they had followed Pam before. Many admitted they'd been uneasy about her heavy-handed methods but didn't know how to oppose someone who acted like she held official power. Others confessed they had handed over payments under pressure, afraid of losing access to amenities they thought were legitimately controlled. Piece by piece, the true depth of Pam's manipulation surfaced. People shared how she had intimidated them, cornering them into compliance. How would you react if someone threatened your family like this? That question echoed in my mind as we watched police vehicles drive away, Pam in custody. Emily had handled the confrontation with precision, using Pam's own aggression to unravel her authority in front of the very people she claimed to control. Still, I could sense Emily knew this wasn't the end. Her sharp focus on gathering evidence and recording details made it clear there were deeper layers yet to uncover. That evening, as we walked back toward the cabin, I noticed Alan Harper moving quickly inside the community center. He was gathering paperwork and computer gear, shoving things into boxes with an urgency that suggested he was preparing to disappear. While most eyes had been locked on Pam's arrest, Alan was already trying to erase his trail. Emily spotted it too, watching him with the same calculating gaze she had used all day. It struck me then she had anticipated this. Pam's fall was only one step in a larger puzzle, and Emily knew the picture wasn't complete. Later, in Pam's pocket, I discovered an unlabeled USB drive. Plugging it in that night, I froze when I saw one folder my name. When Monday came, the police station felt different. Emily, now in full uniform, carried herself with unmistakable authority. I had grown used to her casual side at the cabin, but here she was every inch the professional. Watching her move through the building, a commanding respect, handling evidence, and coordinating with colleagues, I realized how much of her career I had underestimated. Then Alan Harper walked into the station. It was the kind of surprise that shouldn't have been one, considering his suspicious behavior. He arrived holding the USB drive, loudly claiming he had proof of Emily's misconduct, evidence that, he insisted, proved she was unfit for law enforcement. His confidence suggested this was a move he had been preparing ever since seeing her dismantle Pam's authority at the community meetings. But something about it reeked of desperation. Instead of a calculated strategy, it looked like a frantic last stand. The USB-labeled Emily evidence contained folders organized to tarnish her reputation. But when digital forensics dug deeper, they uncovered something Harper never meant to share. Hidden partitions revealed his own fraudulent activity as a false business registrations under multiple identities, and detailed financial records of fabricated HOA collections. In trying to frame Emily, he had handed investigators a roadmap to his crimes. What he presented as evidence of misconduct was riddled with doctored files, yet in the process, he accidentally exposed genuine proof of his own fraud. The scale was staggering. His record stretched beyond our lakeside community, showing patterns of fabricated organizations across multiple retirement and rural neighborhoods. Thousands of dollars had been siphoned from residents who believed they were paying legitimate community dues. This wasn't petty harassment, this was organized fraud, with Alan and Pam exploiting vulnerable homeowners through fear and deception. As I reviewed the evidence alongside the investigators, I recognized a familiar pattern. The schemes reminded me of the automotive fraud cases I'd seen years ago. Fake claims, fabricated documents, carefully constructed lies. The difference now was the scale and polish. Alan wasn't running one corner, he was orchestrating an entire network of them, with professional-looking paperwork designed to deceive on a massive level. Alan's fraudulent paperwork was crafted with such precision that it almost looked authentic, but that very attention to detail became the undoing that exposed his intent. Investigators connected his digital records directly to our lakeside ordeal, tracing the sham business registrations and financial accounts back to him. Many of the templates he had used in our community meetings matched the ones stored on his drive, confirming that our HOA documents were nothing more than pieces of a larger scam. Even the QR codes that fueled payments to Pam's personal PayPal were part of a broader system designed to extract money from residents while disguising it as legitimate community management. A simple investigative trail revealed fake corporate filings and missing permits, exposing that no lawful HOA had ever been established here. Alan had constructed elaborate paperwork that looked official but failed every legal standard required for real governance. That's why Emily's sharp legal questions unsettled both Alan and Pam during their so-called presentations. She had already spotted cracks in their Section 8, for instance, when she analyzed the photo I took of the lake sign against state property databases. She uncovered glaring inconsistencies. The state park identification codes didn't match any HOA claims in their paperwork. That single photograph became crucial evidence, proving Pam's supposed authority over the lake was nothing but a lie. Emily's disciplined evidence gathering was paying off as small details were stacking together into a sweeping portrait of fraud. Alan's clumsy attempt to frame her only showcased how little he understood about modern law enforcement. His evidence was amateur work, no match for digital forensic tools. Instead of discrediting Emily, he handed investigators proof of his own crimes while clearly showing intent to obstruct justice. Every move he made to cover himself only deepened the trail of his guilt. The scope widened quickly. Other agencies reported nearly identical scams of fake HOAs demanding fees, harassing homeowners, and creating fear. It became obvious this wasn't just a local con. It was a widespread scheme, with federal charges looming depending on how far Alan's interstate activities reached. As the investigation unfolded, one truth about liars rang louder than ever: they always accuse others of the very lies they themselves are living. Alan embodied that perfectly, projecting his dishonesty onto Emily while trying to act innocent. His swagger during the USB presentation evaporated once investigators systematically exposed the reality of his crimes. The gap between his accusations and his actual behavior was undeniable to everyone in the room. Then the day shifted again. Emily received a call from the state parks administration, her expression tightening as she listened. Concern quickly gave way to a look of satisfaction. She arranged an official meeting with state officials, community residents, and even media present. Clearly, what the state had uncovered would need to be laid out publicly. Tomorrow, Emily said, snapping her laptop shut with finality. Pam's about to see what real authority looks like. Her smile reminded me that in our family, justice was second nature. By Wednesday morning, the lakeside was buzzing with activity. News vans lined the road, residents gathered in clusters, and state officials prepared displays of survey maps and legal documents to reveal the truth. People who had lived for years under Pam's illusion of power were about to learn just how deeply they'd been deceived. Emily stood tall beside the state representatives in her uniform, her role no longer hidden. Neighbors who once saw her as just another resident were about to realize they'd been manipulated by Pam's fraudulent operation and that Emily was the one bringing the truth into the light. Meanwhile, my own role in this unfolding revelation centered around a piece of evidence tied to Alan's vehicle registration numbers. In one of Alan's own surveillance photos, investigators spotted vehicle details that gave him away. My years working on cars had trained me to notice identification numbers and registration plates instinctively. Alan's careless documentation ended up providing the very evidence needed to connect his shell corporations to a string of HOA fraud schemes across multiple communities. What had started as a mechanic's habit of noticing vehicles became a key part of a multi-state investigation. The state representative opened the official presentation with certified survey maps documents that instantly dismantled every one of Pam's claims about HOA jurisdiction over our lakeside neighborhood. The maps, verified by state authorities, clearly proved that all access roads, lake facilities, and community spaces were entirely within public state park property. No private association had ever been granted authority here. Pam's control over lake access, maintenance fees, and neighborhood governance had been fabricated from the start. Even the old state park sign I noticed weeks ago half hidden by overgrown brush all was evidence. She had intentionally allowed vegetation to obscure it so residents would never see the truth of the land's ownership. Her reaction as the facts were revealed was unforgettable. From my place in the crowd, I could see the shock on her face as the representative explained that she had been illegally collecting money on public land for years. "This is impossible," Pam shouted as officers restrained her. "I've managed this lakeside community according to proper rules and regulations." But the state's records spoke louder. Every payment she had demanded, Every restriction she had enforced, every threat she had made, all were based on power that never existed. The representative's words were calm but devastating. "Ma'am, you've been operating an unauthorized fee collection scheme on state park property while misrepresenting yourself as a community authority figure." The crowd fell silent. The realization hit hard. Residents had paid thousands of dollars in bogus fees to someone who had no more standing than a stranger walking down the street. Because her scheme crossed state lines, prosecutors confirmed that federal charges would be added to her case. Emily and I presented our full timeline: harassment incidents, intimidation tactics, property sabotage, and ultimately the threat with a weapon. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of someone willing to use manipulation, violence, and fear to protect her fraud. The prosecution moved quickly, listing the charges awaiting both Pam and Alana: fraud, extortion, weapons violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. With the scale of their crimes proven across several states, both faced decades in federal prison. For our neighbors, the impact was staggering. Together, they had lost tens of thousands of dollars over the years Pam's sham association had operated. Restitution would eventually return some of the money, but the psychological scars of living under threats and intimidation would take longer to fade. Many admitted they had suspected something wasn't right but didn't know how to resist someone claiming official authority. The final act was symbolic and powerful. Crews arrived to remove Pam's fake HOA signage. As bolts clattered against the wooden dock and the counterfeit signs came down, the crowd cheered. It was the sound of freedom, months of harassment and fear giving way to truth and relief. Pam's last moments before federal booking were spent in furious denial, shouting that her management had been legitimate and necessary. She could not accept that her empire was nothing but lies. Alan's forged documents scattered into the wind as investigators seized the rest, a fitting image of their conspiracy literally falling apart before our eyes. And through it all, Emily's steady hand had guided the case. Her careful documentation and unshakable professionalism revealed everything Pam had never expected. That the daughter she tried to intimidate was far more prepared, far more capable, and far more determined than she could ever imagine. Emily's steady collection of evidence, combined with her patience in building a prosecutable case, showed why she had been so prepared when Pam's threats escalated. The lakeside confrontation hadn't been an accident. It was carefully designed to reveal Pam's crimes in front of witnesses while simultaneously creating irrefutable proof for prosecutors. Media coverage quickly amplified the impact. Pam's downfall became a cautionary tale, warning other neighborhoods about fraudulent HOA operations. News outlets explained how residents could confirm the legitimacy of homeowners associations and what red flags suggested possible fraud. That publicity would help countless communities recognize similar schemes and arm law enforcement with the information needed to launch new investigations. Federal investigators soon revealed they were broadening the case. Alan's computer files filled with templates, forged documents, and shell company registrations pointed toward dozens of other possible victims in different states. Every day, as news spread, more people came forward realizing they too had been paying illegal fees. The full reach of their operation was only beginning to surface. As the official announcements wrapped up, I walked through the gathering crowd and overheard neighbors quietly confessing stories of intimidation, threats, and financial pressure they had endured. Many had stayed silent out of fear, believing Pam's authority was real. That culture of fear had allowed her to run unchecked for years. Breaking that silence required Emily's persistence and her willingness to endure harassment until Pam inevitably revealed her own criminal hand. The resolution of the case carried significance beyond our personal lives. Pam's empire had been built on deceit, manipulation, and intimidation, but in the end, those same lies destroyed her. Truth about state property ownership, proper governance, and legitimate authority had cut through her elaborate deception. 6 weeks after Pam's arrest, our lakeside community was unrecognizable compared to the fearful neighborhood she once controlled. Morning sunlight glistened on calm waters where families now gathered without anxiety, no longer afraid of breaking fabricated rules or being harassed for normal recreation. Children laughed along the shoreline as parents relaxed nearby, finally enjoying the peace that should have been ours all along. Court-ordered restitution was processed quickly, With Pam and Alan's assets seized and liquidated to repay the thousands they had stolen, the federal court had moved efficiently, handing down prison terms that reflected both the seriousness of their crimes and the widespread harm they caused. Permanent restraining orders guaranteed that neither of them could ever return to our area or contact victims again. Meanwhile, my garage business unexpectedly flourished. Neighbors, grateful for my role in exposing the fraud, brought their vehicles to me, valuing honesty and fair dealing after years of deception from Pam's so-called association. Word spread, and steady work came in from people who now recognize the sharp difference between legitimate business practices and predatory fraud. The lakeside area itself had finally returned to what it was always meant to be, a state park with proper oversight, clear regulations, and professional management. Residents naturally pitched in to maintain common spaces and organize gatherings of voluntary cooperation that stood in sharp contrast to the intimidation and fear that once ruled here. Emily went back to her regular duties in law enforcement while still keeping our cabin as her retreat. She had found the balance she wanted: a professional dedication combined with peaceful living. Her colleagues respected how she handled the Pam case, noting her patience in building an airtight case instead of rushing to arrest someone dangerous without full proof. That patience only strengthened her reputation. When we finally gathered up Pam's old violation notices and recycled them, it felt symbolic, a cleansing of months of harassment, intimidation, and false authority. It was the perfect way to close a dark chapter and step fully into the peace we had fought so hard to reclaim. Every fake violation notice went straight into the recycling bin, along with Pam's threatening letters, forged documents, and fraudulent fee demands. Watching that paperwork vanish felt like wiping away the last traces of her invented authority from our lives. Once neighbors realized how thoroughly Pam had pitted them against each other through manipulation, the community began to heal quickly. People who had once avoided us during her reign of intimidation now stopped by to share their own stories of harassment. Genuine friendships began forming, connections based on respect and trust rather than shared fear. The bond Emily and I built throughout this ordeal grew stronger, shaped by the challenges we faced together. Seeing her shift so seamlessly between her role as a professional law enforcement officer and her role as family gave me a deeper appreciation for her strength, commitment, and sense of justice. Our evening talks became richer, filled with stories from her work she had never shared before. Property values bounced back almost immediately once buyers learned that Pam's scams and harassment were permanently over. Realtors could finally promote our lakeside neighborhood as the peaceful retirement spot it was meant to be, free from the threat of fake HOA enforcement or illegitimate authority figures. The natural beauty that had first drawn us here was now open to enjoy without fear. State park officials stepped in with proper signage and clear rules that made sense, rules that were transparent, fair, and consistent. It was a stark difference from Pam's confusing, contradictory demands. Residents could finally understand their real rights and responsibilities without dreading arbitrary punishments. Emily's ability to shift between role as a professional officer, neighbor, and family member showed her adaptability and integrity. Her calm competence in the face of Pam's threats required courage, strategy, and professionalism. I found myself admiring her more than ever before. Meanwhile, our local convenience store became a community hub where residents gathered to discuss updates on the federal investigation. The manager even posted newspaper clippings about the case near the coffee counter, turning the space into an informal bulletin board of justice in progress. These casual conversations helped everyone process the shock of realizing they'd been victims of such a large fraud scheme. Federal investigators continued to uncover victims far beyond our state. Pam and Alan's operation turned out to be part of a massive network targeting retirement communities across multiple states. The publicity from our case encouraged countless others to step forward. In the evenings, walking through the neighborhood, I saw a new reality: families grilling outdoors, kids riding bikes without fear, adults chatting across lawns without worrying about breaking fake community standards. The natural rhythm of neighborhood life had returned once the false authority was stripped away. Pam's downfall was almost poetic. Her obsession with control pushed her to escalate her behavior until she exposed herself. We had come to the lake seeking peace and simplicity, but we learned that real peace sometimes requires resisting corruption, truth about legitimate governance eventually triumphed over intimidation and lies. It didn't end with fireworks or chaos. It ended quietly, with the neighborhood finally breathing freely again. Pam had claimed she was the law, ruling by fear, and for a moment she nearly convinced everyone. But real authority was never hers. It was always in Emily's steady, capable hands. No dramatics, just truth, plainly delivered. And with that, balance returned. Maybe the bigger lesson is this: the people who shout the loudest about rules are often the ones most afraid of facing them. If you've stayed with me this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story struck a chord or even brought a smiley, don't forget to hit the thanks button below. Stay steady, stay sharp, and remember, if a stranger ever demands your weekend, ask to see the badge. That's it for now from Anna Dramanest. Make sure you're subscribed and turn the bell on because the next story might just surprise you even more.